We have sunk their Navy. We have set them back years upon years upon years in terms of what they would like to do to be able to export terror around the world. The final thing is, can you get to a deal where you can guarantee to the American people no nuclear weapons for these butchers? If we get there, that is a victory. And I think if we get there soon, the American people will see that as a good thing.
He thinks he can use pressure tactics like he did in Venezuela. Like
Which
he's
worked.
doing. Like he's doing, they did.
Well, this is a very different country.
Yeah, he took Maduro out, but there's still political prisoners there, and a lot of the Venezuelans. So do not claim that Venezuela is a victory.
In today's video, Ana Navarro takes on Scott Jennings on CNN's Newsnight as tensions rise over Trump's low approval ratings and the Iran conflict. Ana Navarro pushes back with sharp facts, while Scott Jennings struggles to defend the administration under pressure, with polls showing Trump below 40%, historically tied to major midterm losses like Nixon and Bush. The debate intensifies alongside concerns over gas prices and global instability. So let's dive in and watch how Ana Navarro shuts down Scott Jennings on CNN's Newsnight.
Trump's handling of the war in Iran. Those numbers are very similar to his handling of the job as a whole, with 65% of people disapproving. Will this go to help him or hurt him as he's continuing to do this thing where he says, I'm going to attack, okay, now I'm not going to attack, and it's all been done sort of to the public, but not to Congress? Peter?
No, it's been done to the public, but that is also the fact that we're not sitting in the negotiation rooms, and whether that's happening in Islamabad, whether that's happening with emissaries from Qatar, from Oman, or whether that's in other channels that the U.S. has, we're only seeing the tip of this much, much, much more delicate regional and specific picture. Frankly, time is very much not on the Iranian side from their longevity as a regime. Time is also not on this administration side, just when it comes to gas prices in the midterm. So the fact that the president is holding off, I think, does send a signal that there could be a far more significant development in the short term, especially coming on the heels of the president's trip to China, where Xi Jinping, very notably, and the Chinese government, Xi Jinping does not like to get into domestic affairs of other countries because they don't want anyone talking about their Uyghur problem or anything else. Or I should say their horrific treatment of the Uyghurs and the human rights abuses. But Xi Jinping said Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. We agree on that component, and the Strait of Hormuz should be open. That's a very significant concession.
But he didn't offer anything to open.
What is he going to do?
I mean, let me challenge that.
They are suffering economically. The Chinese retail consumption was 3 points off expectations yesterday. It was 0.2%, barely grew year over year.
I mean, there's a lot that China can do to pressure Iran. Yeah. I mean, including turning off their intel sharing with Iran to target American troops. That would be a big one.
Right. But right now, the Chinese are suffering from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
Of course.
Maybe not more than other folks in Asia, but certainly a heck of a lot more.
But I think this administration wanted to walk away from that summit with Xi Jinping with a win, to say that, yes, the Chinese president is in fact going to put pressure on Iran. And they didn't get that.
There was additional daylight that grew up. While Xi Jinping and Donald Trump were talking, the Iranians seized a Chinese flagged ship and impounded it. I mean, some of the messages coming out of Iran of like, this is a betrayal of the alliance that we had. I mean, that daylight, it may not be a mile wide, but if it was a crack, I mean, you can see to the other side.
I do want to mention that the Chinese Xi Jinping had said this before this meeting with Trump, that the Strait of Hormuz should be open. Obviously, China's suffering as well, in a much bigger way even than the United States, and that they would like to see a closure to this war.
But the nuclear component and Iran not being a nuclear power, that was a significant development.
Cornell, how do you see this?
What makes this stand out is how much it reflects the tension between public perception, geopolitical strategy, and real-world economic pressure. On the domestic side, polling data from several recent national surveys shows presidential approval tied to foreign conflict handling often mirrors broader job approval, especially when energy prices rise. Historically, spikes in oil prices during conflicts like the Gulf War and Iraq War have directly correlated with midterm losses, as voters tend to punish incumbents for instability at the pump. On the international layer, the discussion around China is especially important. China remains Iran's largest trading partner, accounting for a significant share of its crude oil exports through sanctioned shadow fleet channels, tracked by maritime intelligence reports. That economic dependency gives Beijing real leverage, but it also creates risk for China as its own growth slows, with recent IMF projections cutting China's GDP forecast due to weak domestic demand and property sector instability. There's also the strategic dimension of the Strait of Hormuz, which handles roughly 20% of global oil shipments, according to the US Energy Information Administration. Any disruption there immediately impacts global inflation, shipping insurance costs, and food supply chains, which is why multiple administrations, regardless of party, have prioritized keeping it open. On Iran itself, UN human rights reports continue to document mass arrests, political executions, and restrictions on civil liberties, reinforcing why international pressure remains central to negotiations. So underneath the debate, the real issue is not just political messaging, it's how fragile global energy security and regional power balances are shaping every decision being made in real time.
And the way this war is being handled, because Americans are very, very concerned about it, especially since it's gone on far longer than they were expecting, than they were told.
You know, I always try to look at the world through the lens of the least of these, the people who are suffering the most vulnerable. And so when I look in Iran, I see people dealing with execution, subjugation, domination, repression. They're human beings like anybody else. I say the same thing about Gaza and genocide. I say the same thing about black folk in Harlem. Same thing about poor whites in Kentucky. There's got to be a moral and spiritual lens. And when you look through the world through moral and spiritual lens, which for me as a Christian, look at the world through the lens of the cross, it looks like you're always headed toward crucifixion, because they're the ones who get crucified for the most part. You see, the everyday people, the poor people. And so we see the gangsters at the top, manipulating, playing power politics, crushing the people in their own respective contexts. And we end up with a dialogue that's deodorized at the top, that hiding the funk of the suffering and the unbelievable blood that's flowing. So in that sense, I have a critique across the board, but when I see the war, it's an illegal, it's an immoral war, but at the same time, I see a immoral regime in Iran. You see?
You're saying two things can be true at the same time.
Two things can be true at the same time.
How is this going to play out, you think, if this war continues to linger on? Obviously, the gas prices and all the cost of the war to the American public, to the regular person, hitting pretty hard. How do you see this playing out for the midterms? Do you think it's going to...
It's not good for Republicans. It's not good for Trump. I mean, the numbers don't lie, and the numbers have been fairly consistent. I don't know how many regular Americans who are trying to put food at the table, who are taking care of their children, who are working 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet, are really following every development of this war. I think most people are like, just wake me up when it's over, and it's not over. Every day it lingers on more and more. I also think, you know, when I see and read these threats by Trump, it's a little reminiscent of Taco, right? Trump always chickens out. It's a little, this is the same guy who threatened Iran with complete eradication of their civilization during the Easter weekend. So it's like the little president who cried wolf a little too much. And I think something we can all agree on is that the messaging around this war has been disorganized, undisciplined, and not very effective. And I think that this zigzagging and threatening and screaming, you know, at the kids in the yard by Trump doesn't help the messaging issue.
Do you think it's been disorganized and the messaging just kind of all over the place?
Look, I think the president's been pretty clear. His number one objective is he does not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. That's been his top priority. He said it again today. He says it virtually every day. He didn't really make a political decision. He made a national security decision, which is what we elect commanders-in-chief to do. He decided that they were on the brink of getting a nuclear weapon. He wasn't going to permit it. It's his red line, and he is enforcing it. And he's really sort of set politics aside. I mean, the polling is pretty clear on it, but he has kind of set politics aside and said, I can't worry about politics all the time. Sometimes I have to worry about national security, and that's his choice. And a lot of this rests on his shoulder.
What really stands out in this exchange is the clash between moral framing, economic reality, and national security logic. On one hand, there's a consistent emphasis on the human cost of prolonged conflict, and that aligns with what multiple humanitarian datasets have been showing. UN monitoring reports have repeatedly documented severe repression inside Iran, including mass arrests of protesters and hundreds of recorded executions annually, which has kept Iran near the top of global execution rates alongside a handful of other authoritarian states. At the same time, there's a broader economic dimension that often gets overlooked in these debates. The US Energy Information Administration has noted that even limited instability in the Strait of Hormuz can trigger immediate global oil price spikes, which historically feed into inflation pressures that disproportionately hit lower and middle income households. That connection between foreign conflict and domestic affordability is one of the reasons war fatigue tends to rise quickly in polling data. There's also a documented pattern in public opinion, research from Pew and Gallup showing that most Americans, regardless of party, tend to prioritize cost of living issues over foreign policy escalation when asked to rank national concerns. That helps explain why long, uncertain conflicts often lose public support over time. On the national security side, non-proliferation experts from the International Atomic Energy Agency have repeatedly warned that nuclear thresholds are the most dangerous point in any confrontation with Iran because once enrichment capacity reaches breakout levels, diplomatic leverage shrinks dramatically. So underneath the disagreement, the real tension is between immediate moral concern, long-term strategic deterrence, and the very real economic pressure felt by everyday households.
Respectfully, if I might disagree regarding chickening out, I don't think the top level of the Iranian regime that we took out in the opening hours of this war would think that he chickened out. Probably don't see it that way right now. We inflicted massive military damage against the top layer of Iranian leadership, against their military sites, and so on and so forth. We have sunk their navy. We have set them back years upon years upon years in terms of what they would like to do to be able to export terror around the world. The final thing is, can you get to a deal where you can guarantee to the American people no nuclear weapons for these butchers? If we get there, that is a victory, and I think if we get there soon, the American people will see that as a good thing.
He thinks he can use pressure tactics like he did in Venezuela, like
Which
he's
worked.
doing. Like he's doing, they did.
Well, this is a very different country.
He took Maduro out, but there's still political prisoners there, and a lot of
Alex
the
Saab was just
Venezuelans. So do not
today.
claim that Venezuela is a victory. It's not. It's yet.
Trump's got an 80% approval rating in Venezuela right now.
That's not true. And let me just tell you this. Let me tell you this. The woman who was the party who was legally elected in Venezuela is somewhere out in exile because he has made a pact with Maduro's number two. And Maduro's worst executors are still running around free in Venezuela, terrorizing the Venezuelan people. There are still political prisoners. But he thought that he could, he used all sorts of scare tactics with Venezuela. He's using all sorts of scare tactics to tighten the screws on Cuba. But those are, smaller countries without a real military and really not much of an option but to fold. Iran is a completely different game. And I think these scare tactics of his just are not having the same effect because they have an incredible tolerance, more than I thought they would have, of enduring pain and pressure.
Butchery. You got butchery in Gaza. You got butchery on the West Bank. You got butchery in Tehran. You got butchery going on. If all we do is just butchery, is butchery all the way down. What does that mean? It's over. People reach a point where they have a contempt for humanity. We no longer have the capacity to express love, care, and concern for others, let alone the least of these. That's what's sad. It's butchery all the way down, though, brother.
But in our case, we're taking on the butchers. The case of Iran's
America
regime
has this history of butchery too.
They butcher their own people. They drag them out into the street. They hang them. They behead them.
40,000 this year.
If women don't wear the right clothes, or they take off their.
That's exactly right. We got butchery and slavery and Jim Crow and lynching. We got butchery in Gaza. You got butchery in Venezuela. You got. This is Jonathan Swift all the way down. All right, we're on the way to misanthropy.
Should we have looked the other way on Iran?
I think that we could come up with ways of minimizing the butchery.
You know what? On that,
yes.
What really stands out in this is how sharply it exposes the gap between military outcomes and real geopolitical stability. Even when a state suffers significant battlefield losses, history shows that doesn't automatically translate into political compliance. For example, Rand Corporation analyses on asymmetric warfare consistently note that regime resilience often increases after external strikes, especially when nationalist narratives are activated domestically and leadership consolidates internal control. There's also the broader issue of humanitarian law, where organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have repeatedly documented that civilian populations tend to absorb the long-term consequences of prolonged sanctions and military escalation far more than governing elites. That dynamic is important because it often weakens the intended pressure effect of force-based strategies and can unintentionally strengthen hardline actors. On the economic side, the US Energy Information Administration has warned that disruptions in key maritime choke points like the Strait of Hormuz can trigger immediate global oil shocks, which then ripple into inflation spikes affecting food, fuel, and transport costs worldwide. That is why even limited escalation scenarios are treated cautiously by global financial institutions and central banks. At the same time, non-proliferation experts from the International Atomic Energy Agency emphasize that once a country approaches nuclear breakout capability, purely coercive approaches become less predictable, requiring sustained diplomacy rather than rapid escalation cycles or short-term military signaling. So the deeper issue in this exchange isn't just disagreement over tactics, it's the long-standing tension between military pressure, humanitarian consequences, economic stability, and the structural limits of forcing political change in highly centralized regimes. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.